Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's on the who's attending this wonderful event. Before I start, I do want to say that I am truly honored to be speaking at DITAWORLD. It's been a dream of some sorts to be able to speak at DITAWORLD for me ever since I got into the content profession, and here we are. So just like Jack said, dreams do come true. And so with that, let's jump into the presentation I've pulled together for all of us. What I am going to talk about is what is content operations. And over the past few years, my definition of content operations really boils down to a content governance model that focuses on or encompasses context in which the content is written, the authors who create the content, the tools that enable creating the content, and content operations, how they enable products and services in their go-to-market strategy. With that, the first thing I'm going to focus on is context. What is the content written for? Who's accessing it? When are they accessing it? And where are they accessing it from? When it comes to context, it's often, a lot of people say that context is extremely important. If content is king, context is God. If content is king, context is the queen. So there's many quotations that actually highlight the importance of context. But the way I look at this is to understand context and the content that's created is really to think about what is the content being created for, who's going to use it, what is it going to be used for, and where is the content getting consumed. Context also sets the goal for the content strategy that you are working on for the product or for the service that your company is offering. Context is also extremely important to enable content for product usage and adoption. So content is created for SEO and SEM, search engine optimization, and search engine marketing. Those of us who are focused on the marketing side of things probably hear about SEM a lot. Those of us who've been in the content arena for several years understand how reader profiles play into creating or making content available. We also focus in on customers' adoption journey in terms of where a customer is at with regards to the product usage. Are they new? Are they experienced users? Are they a returning customer? Are they here just to get a quick peek of what the product does? Or are they here to actually make a buying decision? And that takes you to the content is used for. What are the goals behind the usage of the content? Is it related to decision making? So will a data sheet suffice? Will a product brochure suffice? Or is it learning? Are they going to sign up for your training courses? Are they going to actually learn what the new technology or the new product does? And then how are they going to engage with your content for ongoing usage of the product? So these are some of the reasons why content is created. And in today's day and age, we all know content is consumed on many different devices. It's accessed over mobile devices. It's accessed over connected devices. So all of us have Google Home that we use. We have Alexa. We have all these. We have bots that often access the content that's been written by someone. And then there's the videos and podcasts that also typically will use or project content that's been created for a specific context. So in my words, the way I put it is content and context are equally important. One cannot exist without the other. So it's very important to keep a keen focus on what's the context for which the content you're writing for actually exists. The second key aspect when it comes to content operations are the authors. It's the marketing writer, the technical writer, the blogger, the UX writer. And one of the things that I want to highlight in this when I talk about authors is everyone writes. If you're in a function which is associated to a product, you are writing, you are creating content, even if it is your typical email, even if it's a text message. Because in that text message, you probably explained a key aspect or a key functionality about a specific product usage aspect. If you were writing an email, you were probably asking a question which was specific to a product feature, which was specific to a product offering. And then, of course, the traditional authors, as we know them, the marketing writers, the social media influencers, the technical writers who write all the user manuals and the deployment guides and how to use the product, the UX writers who contribute to what the UI, the user interface looks like, the technology journalists who typically toot about new technologies and then discuss new products, new groundbreaking product lines that are coming into the arena. So all of these personnel are authors. All of these people create content with a context in mind. And the idea here is to figure out what is it that sets one author different from another, or are we all really doing the same thing? What led me to think about authors and different types of authors that we have in our functions, in our organizations, are that there are silos. And for a long time in my career as a content professional, I used to wonder how is it possible to demolish silos? How is it possible to create a unified authoring team? Is it possible to have one team who sort of controls and delivers all different kinds of content assets that are required for a product? Is it possible to really be the one-stop shop for all content that's made available? And after all these years, my realization is that it's really going to be hard to demolish silos, especially when you're talking about B2B companies, especially when you're talking about companies where there's 10,000 plus people who are working towards different product lines. So my realization based on my experience has been silos will always exist, but they can be unified. And the way to unify them would be using metadata and taxonomies on the inside among the authoring community. So if there is a UX writer, if there is a technical writer, if there's a marketing writer, the idea is to use common metadata, to use the fabric of common metadata and taxonomies, so that your content actually belongs to a certain family of keywords. And the impact of this downstream will be the fact that your SEO and SEM is far more organized and far more well-fed, as I would call it. The pipeline is well-fed. With that, the third aspect about content operations is tools. And tools for all of us who are writers by profession, and all of those of us who don't really write but are still writing in some shape or form, understand that there's authoring tools, there's publishing tools, and there's content management systems that we all work with. And the tools that we use are all encompassing. The ask, or one of the ways to work with tools, and one of the ways tools can help to work through the silos is if the tools enable permeable boundaries, make it so that I can exchange content with the marketing writer. Make it so that the person who's blogging for the next product is able to reuse some of the content that I am creating. When I say permeable boundaries, is that even if you're in the same, there's a good chance you're in the same CMS, but there's also a good chance that you have 36 different CMSs in your company, and probably every department or every function uses a unique CMS just because their demands and their needs are unique. But in essence, basically what the best way would be if there's permeable boundaries across these tools, across these CMSs, so that we can enable content reuse, so that we can work across these silos and we can leverage existing content. This way, we are also able to minimize redundancy, and we're able to create content which is reusable, which is definitely more valuable for our customers. And one of the other key aspects and one of the key features that our tools should provide us is the ability to collect analytics, whether it's on the inside or the outside. In one of my conversations a couple of days ago, I was discussing this presentation, and the thought that came about in the dialogue was, how do you evaluate the authenticity of the content? Because the further removed the author is from the source of the information, there's a higher chance of content that's produced is a product of something lost in translation, something misunderstood, and suddenly the content that's created by that author, for no fault of theirs, is actually not as authentic and as true or as accurate as it should be. So how do our tool platforms enable that authenticity and clarity and clean content creation and publishing for our content consumers? These are things that our tools and our authoring publishing platforms need to be conscious of. All of this actually leads us to product enablement. All of this actually helps us drive towards healthy product adoption. It helps us, these two aspects, product enablement and adoption, are two key categories or two top priorities for our content tools. While tools are focused on, traditionally, tools are more focused on how an author can be successful, but really the idea is how do our tools make it so that the product go-to-market strategy is also being honored while the author is producing content in time. It all boils down to how efficient our tools are. How do our tools actually contribute to an author's success and, by default, help with product go-to-market time? How do they help with enabling quicker time to market? How do our tools, without causing obstruction, without causing any issues in terms of process, in terms of difficulty of use of our products, of our tools, how can they make the life of an author easier? How is it possible for us to create content, relevant content, faster and quicker? The fourth aspect about product operations is go-to-market. And this is where I highlight one of the key points that, in my experience, that I've realized is cut the fat. Because of so much process, the go-to-market time becomes shorter and shorter. But because of the heavy processes, it becomes really hard to actually meet those demands of the market. It becomes very difficult for a lot of products to be shipped and be made available on time, because oftentimes authors get caught up in certain aspects of tooling, or they get caught up in, I'm still waiting for so-and-so for this information. And the question is, how do we make our content operations that efficient that our go-to-market actually benefits from the way our content operations are managed? How do we make our content operations focused on selling, using, and teaching our products that actually feed into the go-to-market strategy? So what is go-to-market? For those of us who are not traditionally part of marketing organization, go-to-market is basically how do you take a product from inception to being sold? And these days, a lot of go-to-market strategies are focused on establishing adoption. Not just, hey, my product release 1.0 is out, it's awesome, it's great, and then by the time release 2.0 comes out in the market, people have forgotten about the product. That's really not the goal, and that really is not the way products are being looked at today. People or companies are looking at how do we increase adoption? How do we establish a good audience, a good number of users who are going to be ongoing adopters and ongoing users of the product? So the idea is with product as the context, all content assets must be authored to enable product deployment at every stage of the customer. So going back to what content operations is, it is setting context for the authors and our tools to develop a go-to-market strategy. So that is how all of these key components actually fit into content operations. Again, I will repeat, product as a context. So if you think back, the idea here is so that when you create content, you know what is the context for which you're creating the content. Who's going to use it? Who's going to read it? Where are they going to read it? And what is it about? It's about the product that you're writing for. It must be authored to enable product deployment at every stage, no matter what stage your customer is at, whether, like I said, whether they're a brand new user, whether they're an experienced user, how are you making your content suitable for their needs? And all of these 3-4 aspects are focused towards enabling your go-to-market strategy. And even if, I'm sure there's a ton of you who are in the audience who think, oh, wait, I'm part of engineering and I have nothing to do with go-to-market. Well, believe me, you're wrong, because whether you're creating content as part of an engineering team or you're creating content as part of a marketing team, or you're creating content as part of a sales team or a support team, it doesn't matter. The content that you're creating for is focused towards a certain consumer. You could be writing for an internal consumer, internal to your company, internal to your team. You could be writing for someone who's on the outside, someone who is brand new learning the product. You could be writing for someone who's a seasoned user. I keep repeating this because many a times, and this is a point that Jack made, was that be proactive. Try to understand who your audience is. Try to understand why they're coming at it. One of the articles I remember reading from Adobe was about how do you create a content experience which actually comes across as a unified experience, which basically provides a smooth journey for a customer, whether they're reading support content, whether they're reading marketing content, irrespective of what kind of content they're creating. How do you enable a smooth content experience for them? And the way that can be achieved is when we as content owners, content writers, content creators really try to understand that, first of all, your content is not going to be the only content that that a customer is going to be reading. It's going to be read in conjunction with. It could be read in conjunction with support content, which is how do you troubleshoot an issue, or it could be read in conjunction with marketing content, marketing brochure, which is very high level. So how do you create content which tries to address these boundaries in as much as a seamless way possible? Again, I'll go back to saying what I said before. We cannot remove the silos. The silos are always going to be there. The question is, how do you work with the silos to your advantage? And again, if I was to defend silos, I think there's a good reason why the silos exist. I think I could not do the job of a marketing writer. I could not do the job of a support writer, because the areas of expertise that they are exposed to, or the platforms that they are offered to create the kind of content, the nature of content that they are responsible for creating, is not something that's in my purview. I'm a technical writer. I write content which is based off of what the product is being released to do. And the goal here is how always to keep in mind, like I said, that your content will be read in conjunction with other pieces of content. So the first and foremost thing is, do not have contradictions. Your content needs to at least be in sync with what the other piece of content or the other content assets are talking about. That's the one big aspect that has to be kept in mind. Again, this goes back to setting up, making sure that you're talking to the other content creators. You're discussing your content strategy, not just within your team, but across the different content writers or authors that will be creating content for the product. And all of this goes back into feeding into the go-to-market strategy. How do you make it so that the content that is being created has a common context? There's communication across the authors, and the tools are communicating among themselves, so that we can make the content experience, whether it's on the inside or outside, as unified as possible. And all of this is geared towards establishing adoption for the product that you're writing for or the service that you're selling. So this is my last slide, and I'll close this. Close my keynote with this quote, which is actually from one of Cisco's studies, which is about what has been a key outcome based off of the pandemic. 72% of organizations expect greater resilience and agility to be byproducts of the pandemic experience. And the reason I bring this up is because the greater resilience and agility are the two things that are going to be needed from the platforms and the tools that we use, not to mention that the personnel that we work for will also be expected to develop that proficiency with the tooling, so that you're able to work towards the needs of the products that you're working for. With that, I will close out. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at my email address right here. And with that, Stefan, back to you.
Thanks, Eeshita.
Thank you, Eeshita.
Yes.
Now you bring our schedule a little bit in trouble because you're finished so early. So we have a lot of time for questions and answers before the next session starts in about 25 minutes.
I wanted to leave some time for question and answers, but so yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, questions in the chat.
So Eeshita, you talked about, you touched on context in terms of doing your authoring and the context in terms of the product. How many people were involved in organizing the content itself and in making the decisions? What's the size of your team, and how did that impact how you made those decisions?
My team, I manage the team that produces documentation for the data center products at Cisco, and my team is we are a team of about 22 writers, and we work in conjunction with the marketing writers. We work in conjunction with people who create the technical marketing content and support content. So really, it's about knowing what they're creating and knowing what you're creating, and making sure that the content that is produced and published to Cisco.com, which is where all our content goes, is in sync. It is made. We want to make sure it is accurate, obviously, and it shouldn't be that one person saying one thing and another saying something else. So that's usually the biggest challenge, because we have, if I was to really count the number of people who are producing content for a specific product, for a specific release, it's anywhere between, I would say, 200 to 300 people. So we have to make sure, and like I said, they're not qualified, or their title is not writer. These are people who are technical marketing engineers. These are people who are product managers. These are people who are, who are support engineers, who are creating content. So the idea is to make sure that we convey a consistent story.
And how do you thread that content together? Is it do you look at it in terms of the common something like DITA, where you're going to have all of your content in DITA, and then are people working with a content management system? How many different tools in terms of authoring and in terms of publishing?
Luckily we all are in the same platform, and the beauty is that we are in a position to tie that data together with the usage of metadata. And I think Pragyanam and Manish are going to present later in the afternoon today about Omnichannel Delivery. That is a Cisco case study, and that is something that Cisco is heavily focused on. How do we make our content available through different channels, and making sure that we are delivering to what is the context that's set up, like, what's the product, what's the launch, who are our key customers, which are the key channels, which are the key geographies. So all of those aspects are taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Stefan, what looks like he's busy working on something.
Sorry, yeah.
Now, Eeshita, what do you do in terms of localization? How does that impact the choices that you make in terms of the systems and the workflows that you've got? How does localization fit into all of that?
Localization is actually part of our authoring workflow, but they are usually I guess the best way to describe it would be that it is handled by the specific geographies. So if you are let's say the content needs to be translated, and this was one of the fun ones that we did a few years ago, Francification, which was in Quebec. Content or any of our hardware that was supposed to be sold in Quebec had to be translated in the local languages. And so typically the translators or our translating team, our localization team, they pick up the content from the CMS and take care of it. So the original author is only informed that we are picking up your content, and now we're going to, we'll be taking it over. So the back and forth is minimized from the get-go. It's actually a very efficient workflow we have in place.
Excellent. So at the point where you're doing localization, the information gets checked out so that the author is aware of that and knows not to make changes to that content.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Fantastic.
I really did give you guys a whole lot of time back, huh?
That's okay. Make sure that Stefan and I have plenty to do.
It's just that, when you start creating this kind of content, it's hard to sort of draw the line and say, okay, I'm going to stop here. Yeah. There's just always so much to convey.
Well, and usually it's exactly the opposite, right? We always run long because we have so much to say and we want to do it, and so it's
There is a question here, if you don't mind, can I pick it up? It's by Kelly Johnson, and she asks, how do I approach breaking down silos? So Kelly, my suggestion to that would be that try to understand the process that your other teams follow with regards to content creation. That's number one. Find out how do they set up their strategy? How do they set up their content strategy? That's the second one. And the third one is, yes, you're probably more than capable of taking over what they're doing, but at the same time, you don't want to step on anyone's toes. To try to leverage the approach that I would recommend you take with regards to working with them is that, hey, you're creating this shade of blue, and I'm creating this shade of blue. Let's try to figure out how to go to market together. How do we make sure that the content, once it's delivered, actually speaks the same language and says and conveys the same story? And what I just summarized is my experience of 20 years, or actually 16 years working at Cisco, is that that's the best way to approach it, is that, hey, let me work with you and let's figure out how to do this together.
Yep. Absolutely agreed. It's interesting. The deeper you dig into the information, the more you find out that we've got that content reuse, but unfortunately, often the content is being recreated and re-edited multiple times by multiple departments, where when you can get together, have that cup of coffee and figure out how we're sharing that information, then that often can allow you to start leveraging what the other person has done and make your own job a lot easier.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's another question by Kai Stevens. So how many people does it take to make your technical authoring system run? So Kai, to your question, we have a very robust IT team that helps us keep our systems up to date, and it is the deployment is very complex. After all, you're talking about almost 5,000 content creators who are in the system, so it's a very, very big deployment, for lack of a better word. In addition, pretty much every technical documentation team at Cisco has at least one or two, if not more, people on their team who are IT's point of contact, who actually work directly with IT to troubleshoot XML or data questions, issues, because it's hard for IT to keep up with a lot of the changes that are happening in terms of content offerings. So today we see, we are using certain templates, and marketing typically comes up with a lot of these requests. Hey, why can't our content look like, some startup that's creating content? So it's just really hard to keep up with those. It's hard for IT to keep up with those demands, but also at the same time, I think that's another area where partnership works. If the authoring teams work in partnership with IT, it's the best. That's probably one of the best solutions.
Okay, I need to step in here a little bit with the Q&A pod. There are really a lot of questions in the Q&A pod. I'm struggling a little bit to read through them and publish them in time, and they pop in so fast. So let me go through them. There was I didn't follow everything that you guys were talking, Matt and you, but let me go through the questions and step in if you said, oh, we already talked about that, then the market has answered. So Preeti was asking, silos make incorporating user feedback more difficult. If a marketing document gets a feedback from end users, how do we see that we maintain consistency between technical documents and help documents?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I didn't catch it.
It's a little bit more complex, yeah. Silos Silos make incorporating user feedback more difficult. That is, I think, clear. If, for example, a marketing document gets feedback from an end user, how do we see that we maintain consistency between technical documents and help documents? I guess the question is basically about, you have that TechCom silo and you have the marketing silo, and user feedback comes to the marketing people, and how do the TechCom people get aware of that feedback, so to say? It's about internal company internal communication, I would say.
Exactly.
If I understood that question right, Preeti.
You shouldn't. I would not ever advocate that. Hold your customer and say, wait, I'm going to check with 5 other departments before I make a change. The approach really should be, I'm going to make the change, but let me also circle back with the other folks who are just as much invested in this content as you are. So this is the area which I think calls for a whole separate presentation, but I won't go there yet, is how do you communicate across teams? We are communicators by profession, and yet we hesitate to let the other team know, or, oh, I just forgot, oh, that's it happens so often, and it's so common that we forget to update other stakeholders about the changes that were made. So that is it's just communication and hygiene, making sure that everyone's kept up to date.
And then there's a question. I rush a little bit through it because we only have about 10-12 minutes left. There's a question from Courtney Collins-Velata. How do you manage terminology alignment across silos? Who makes final decisions if you do not agree? Terminology management in the enterprise.
The terminology alignment and metadata keywords really should come from product management, product marketing, because they are the ones who have a pulse of the market. They should be the ones who should actually bring in those keywords, and the idea is not to I default to what product marketing and product management have to say about how a product is being positioned, and product adjectives or product related qualifiers really should come from product management and product marketing. So, Courtney, to your question, that's my recommendation.
Okay. And Mark is asking, you talked about social media influencers as authors. Please explain your approach to content management as sourced from these third-party players. Is it about topic? Is it all about topic taxonomy or more?
It's a taxonomy is going to help you set up content on a specific website, but metadata is what's going to make it searchable. That's a high level differentiation that I keep in mind. But going back to your question about social media influencers and the content they create, it's even if you're going to put in a compliment for a product, whether it's on Instagram or you're a technology journalist who's writing for one of the established technology websites, in those areas maybe you will use certain product descriptors, maybe you won't, but that falls back to the point I made earlier. Is the further you are away from the source of the information, there's a higher chance of things getting confusing and authenticity being lost. So it's going to be crucial for us to make sure that we stick to the metadata, like I defined, like I explained, is to make sure that you stick with the keywords, you stick with the product descriptors. And one point, Stefan, I want to make is that the technology or social media influencers that I'm talking about I'm not talking about the users who become social media influencers. I'm talking about people who are on the inside of a company or in the social media group of a company who are actually advertising the product. That's what I want to clarify.
That's a great clarification. Yeah. Eeshita, there was another, speaking of great clarifications, there's another great question here. So what content related challenges has Cisco faced or looks at facing in the near future? And which of those have you solved successfully? What have been some of the biggest challenges that you feel you've been able to overcome or that you might see on the horizon?
The biggest challenge, I think, is putting in a very specific information workflow in place is really how I look at it, is to make sure that we are all content creators for a specific product are aligned. And for that, I did have to put in a process in place. I did have to make sure that there is alignment by means of that process. That's one of the recent wins, I would say. And the challenges that we anticipate, and we are going to have this for a long time, is there is a lot of content that Cisco produces, and I think that's true for any big company. All of us produce a lot of content. These are some of the reference points I constantly use. We produce a lot of content. We have a lot of content producers. There is no schedule. There is no one company-wide content calendar. People create content whenever they want to. So all of these things are going to continue to happen. There is no way we can come down and put down the kibosh and say, okay, you're not going to create content beyond midnight. That's not going to happen. It's just not possible. So we have to keep those things in mind. And the idea really is, like I said, there used to be a talk about this chief content officer's office. A lot of companies, actually, even companies like Facebook and such, for whom content is the business, they do have these kind of setups. But no one's going to create a chief content officer's committee or something like that in Cisco. So the idea is really, let's figure out how do we, if there are, define your territory. That's number one. Figure out how far do you want to go? How focused do you want to keep it? And based on that, pull in the right stakeholders, pull in the correct people, and then put the process in place. That's my recommendation.
Excellent.
Okay. There's another question from Denise Cadillac. Do you find a disconnect between the tech writers, marketing writers, support writers? Not all have the same tech skills, so how does the metadata requirement work?
So it is true, there is a disconnect, and that disconnect is my biggest challenge to overcome. It is, and putting in this process really did help getting a lot of the stakeholders aligned. How do we use the common metadata? And that is something that is that's an internal implementation in Cisco, is where we can use common metadata across the content platforms we use now. And this goes back to the point that Cisco's content that is on Cisco.com is based off of one common platform. So that is a big thing that plays in our favor. And that's something that helps us drive the metadata adoption. Okay.
Then there's a question from Ashleen. How do we access the session videos? Okay, sorry. I will answer that separately. How far are you planning ahead content, is John Deanton asking. For example, do you use a cross-silo content or editorial roadmap so you understand what and who is writing content for specific jobs?
Because of the, like I said, I was explaining to Courtney, is that you have to know who the writers are. You have to know who's creating content from marketing, from support. You have to literally know who these people are. And that's the only way you're going to get them to align to this vision. That's the only way you're going to be able to get them to understand. You're not trying to take over their work. You're not trying to give them your work. It's just a matter of, let's just talk to each other. Let's not deepen the silos. Let's make sure that even if, yes, you work in a certain silo and I work in my own, how do we talk to you? How do we keep the communication channels open? And the other part to the question, Stefan, is about how far out do we plan? We do have visibility into product roadmaps. So we do know that, hey, at this point in time, there's going to be a major release, and that's why we're going to be creating all this content. Or this content or this release is going out for a very specific customer. Hence, we need to be aligned with those with that story. So that visibility is important. Strategy cannot be based off of 24 hours in advance. That's not gonna work. You really have to have a little bit more visibility, like maybe at least 3 to 6 months out. That visibility needs to be.
Okay, we have only about 4 minutes left, and there's still a lot of questions. So a lot of them are related to the silo topic, and that seems to be a big challenge in in many, many companies. Adobe's approach to that is, of course, that we try to solve it or give a technology solution to that to people, that we bring everyone onto the same platform, like with Adobe Experience Manager, where you have the marketing folks on Adobe Experience Manager and the technical communication folks on Adobe Experience Manager, and both can share content, share the same taxonomy and all that, and share the content and even reuse content from each other. But even with that, there are, of course, communication silos in companies as well that we have to somehow solve, and that is across department communication and things like that.
Yes.
And that is a challenge in every company, I can tell. So one question, as we have only these 3 minutes left, Eeshita, there's still a lot of questions in the Q&A pod. I guess you can, as soon as you turn off presenting, you can see the Q&A pod. Would you be willing to stay for maybe 15, 20 minutes longer and answer some of these questions which are directly related or direct questions to you?
Yeah, I can do that. Or if you don't mind, you can email them to me, and I can definitely make sure to respond to them. Either way is fine.
Okay. So as the people are here in the room now and would like to get an answer, if your schedule does allow it to stay a little bit longer for a couple of more minutes, and you could answer them in the chat.
I can do that.
In the
let's do that.
section.
Yeah, let's do that.
That would be awesome. Okay, I think the people
you can always put your email into the chat as well.
Yeah, where do you want me? Should I just type it in here?
Or you can just link to your LinkedIn profile or so.
Yeah, that's fine too. I can send you a link to my LinkedIn.
We'll just put it
everywhere. How many questions there are?
No, that's the idea, really. I mean, it's very hard to. When it comes to a content problem or a content challenge, it's very hard to put everything in a quick presentation. There's just so many things that come to your mind when you're thinking about these things.
Yep.
So I am totally open to whoever wants to reach out for a chat, or I'm happy to help.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Then thank you so much, Eeshita, for your short, inspiring keynote and the long discussion after it. Great stuff. I really love it.